The explosion ripped through the building.
Robin Horsfall was born in Farnham, Surrey, in the United Kingdom. Following a divorce from his birth father, his mother Hazel married his stepfather, who adopted him and gave him the name Horsfall. A broken family life adversely affected his education, so he left school in 1972 at the age of 15 and joined the army as a boy soldier. Despite a long period of isolation and bullying by his peers, he became a full member of the Parachute Regiment in 1974 and served 3 tours of Northern Ireland. In 1978, he volunteered for SAS selection and passed on his second attempt in March 1979. He went on to qualify as a paramedic and sniper. He was a member of the SAS counter-terrorist team that assaulted the Iranian Embassy in London in 1980, helping to rescue the 19 hostages who had been held for 6 days. In April 1982, he partook of Operation Mikado in the Falklands War. In 1986, he was the bodyguard to Dodi Al-Fayed in London, a contract soldier Sri Lanka, and in 1987, bodyguard to Sheikh Mohammed and John Ackah Blay-Miezah, amongst many men he has protected over the decades. He wrote the highly successful autobiography, Fighting Scared. He has written a trilogy of his own philosophical proverbs, short stories, maxims, and poetry known as the Words of the Wise Old Paratrooper. More recently, in 2021, he produced a collection of more somber works from throughout the years, which paired with striking illustration became Warrior Poet, A Soldier's Songs. Robin has had an extraordinary life and has been speaking about it at events both small and large for over 10 years.
Robin, everyone knows your story, right? You're part of this group, and everyone has saw it. I recall seeing it, but I have to ask you one funny story, and we'll talk about that, which has to do with Princess Diana. So let me write that down so I don't forget, because it's a legend, it's a myth, and I don't even know if it's true, if it's a prank, and if it's true. But let's get into you and where you're at right now. So you've written all these books, and you have done so many shows. But take me way back a long time ago to when you were a youth. And I think that makes such a difference on how a man is formed. And I think you can track that as well, because you've taught so many students in martial arts. You've taught so many veterans, right, to be very capable people. Take me to your childhood. What was that like growing up?
Well, I think I had a good childhood, actually, as childhoods go. I don't think I had any advantages. When I was born, my earliest recollections, I don't remember my father because he was in prison. He was a thief. And so I never knew him. So I lived with my grandparents, and my mother worked in a hospital laundry. And I went to good school, started school at the age of 4. My mother and father were divorced when I was 7 years old, and she married a man called Jeffrey Horsfall, who gave me his name and adopted me. And he didn't have any experience of kids, and up until the age of 7, I never had any experience of fathers, and consequently we clashed. And his methods of dealing with a rebellious, difficult boy was to beat him into silence. And I refer to that these days as somebody stole my voice, because when you beat somebody into silence, you take away their voice, you take away their ability to negotiate, you stunt their development. And so when a youth shrugs his shoulders and refuses to answer your question, it's because in the past somebody stole his voice, somebody suppressed him, and he doesn't believe anybody's going to listen to him. And I struggled for quite a long time to make friends, but I lived in a time when there was no television, there were no mobile phones, there were no computers. At school, we did computing with slide rules, which is quite a complicated system. And I went to a very good school, but because my mother and father's life started to break up, their marriage started to break up after 5 or 6 years, so did my education. And I was the only boy in my school to leave at the age of 15, and I joined the British Army. And it was an escape. It was an escape from a broken home. It was a search for something to belong to. It was a search for guidance and mentorship. Unfortunately, the school leaving age in Britain then was 15, and you could join the British Army as a junior soldier, which meant for the next 2 years and 3 months, you were a full-time soldier, but you couldn't go on operations. And you were being trained to be a non-commissioned officer of the future. And that was the foundations of my life. Those 2 years were what everything else was built on. And even the last 6 months of that period of time, up to the age of 17 and a half, I was being taught to teach, being taught to stand in front of groups, being taught to impart knowledge to others and control large groups of people. And that stayed with me vocationally for the rest of my life. I went on from there to the Parachute Regiment, from there to the Special Air Service, from there to being a mercenary and bodyguard, a martial arts teacher, and eventually an author. So that's the interview finished. Let's go home now.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, what was the culture like at the time? What was the temperament of the UK for the military? Who was in office? I mean, this was the 1970s. So, we go peaks and valleys with patriotism and nationalism in many countries. Where was it for you guys? Is that something boys talked about, going into the military, into the service at your age?
Yeah,
15,
well,
16?
the military in the British context was an opportunity for those of us without qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, I mean, the draft in the USA during the Vietnam War was the biggest literacy school in the USA, because a lot of people who joined couldn't read and write. So they had to teach them to read and write so that they could actually teach them how to use the weapons. We weren't in that situation. We had a population that could actually read and write before they got there, but we had the issues with Northern Ireland going on, the Troubles as it's been called, and it had only been going on for 3 years at that time, which was we had essentially a war going on in the United Kingdom, even though it was across a short space of sea, and so we knew that was going to be probably where we were going to go on operations as soon as we were old enough, and our training was focused towards that. But the British Army was a skills engine for the future as well. It trained people to be leaders. It trained technicians, drivers, cooks, signalers, radio technicians, electronic technicians, mechanics. It trained them all. So it didn't only train the skills for the army, it trained the middle classes of the future when those guys left. So it was an opportunity, and I was fortunate enough to be able to take advantage of it at a time when I needed it. And sadly, it doesn't exist in the same strength as it did then. We had 13,000 boy soldiers mm-hmm. in the British Army over various different units across the United Kingdom in 1972 when I joined. And it was a military college for young unqualified men, from many of us from dysfunctional homes, who needed a place to belong, a strict discipline system, good mentors, and a future. You mentioned patriotism, and patriotism isn't a huge part of British culture. It really isn't. It's not a word that's commonly used over here. We don't worship our flag or our government, or even, and it took 50 years for us to hold our former monarch, Queen Elizabeth, in such high regard, because mm-hmm. she proved herself over such a wonderful period of time. But I joined the British military for a job, for an opportunity, for a future. It wasn't for king and country. It wasn't to be a patriot and sacrifice my life for. If I was going to take risks, it was going to be for my friends, for my colleagues, for the people in my small unit, leading up maybe as far as my regiment, who wore the same cap badge. But that would have been about the limits of it. King and country, yeah, I mean, we could do the parades, we could have the music and the bands, but in our hearts, we were soldiers, we were professionals. It was many of us did 22 years. I did 12, and I bought myself out after 12 years. But that's a story that's in my book, Fighting Scared. But it wasn't all joy and wonderful. It was hard work. It was educational. They continued our education, and it built a future for me. And I'm so glad it happened.
Yeah, it's a funny quote I read years and years ago. It says, a Frenchman walks with his nose up in the clouds and believes himself to be the greatest. And the Brit, he walks with his nose down, but he knows he's the greatest. He just knows, And I find it funny because I think that's probably an independent spirit in the UK, just this sensibility of being, your own person. And so there's not that patriotism, but you have it where you're in, Hyde Park or something on the soapbox, giving a speech. And I think that's that kind of British sensibility of the educated person to go find out for themselves what's right and what's wrong. And I could be wrong, but I that strikes me as we're
a very different culture from USA and from Canada and from Australia. The English language binds us together in many ways, but it sometimes blinds us to the differences that actually exist among us. And many people from the UK that will travel abroad to the USA and Canada, they'll end up coming back with a completely different perspective, and the same in the other direction. We are living in an age of individuals where everybody thinks that they have the right to do as they please, say what they please, and act as they please. And there's some benefits to that, but we're losing sight in many ways of our history, our culture, what we belong to, what's important, what's valuable and worth holding on to, even in the face of such rapid change. And I think Britain itself, the United Kingdom, is struggling through a period of massive change, and we're not quite sure how to handle it. So I always try to shy away from generalizations about peoples from different countries or races and beliefs, because we're all pretty much the same, a great network of people with our own divisions and our own prejudices and so on. And we struggle to cope with them. And given the right leadership and guidance, we can get better. We can always get better. But given the wrong leadership and the wrong guidance, we're not too far away from returning to, international superpower wars, and that's all down to the people we vote to put in charge.
Oh, certainly. Now, December of 74, you left the junior service. Now, as you said, it's preparatory to go into the big military, but you had a choice there, didn't you? I mean, you had a choice whether you wanted to go into the paras or depart. Is that how it worked out?
Well, no. When I joined at 15, I'd been what they call a St. John's ambulance boy. So a little first aider, trained in first aid, getting into the football for free, sitting at the front, and so on. And so when I went to join the army at 15, they said, "What do you want to join?" And I said, "I want to join the Royal Army Medical Corps as a technician." They said, "You're not clever enough for that." I said, "Okay, fine. What's your next choice?" I said, "The Royal Military Police." They said, "No, you're far too clever for that." And they direct you where they want you to go. And my third choice, which was something I never dreamed that I was going to be tough enough for, was the Parachute Regiment. And that was my third choice, and that was the only choice they offered me. And so I joined as an infantry junior leader on September the 12th, 1972, and stayed with it for the next two years and 3 months. And so my regiment was chosen while I was a boy soldier. And then I went to Paradepot to do my parachute training and transition from a boy soldier to an adult soldier in December 1974. And I passed out of there just before my 18th birthday in March 1975. And that year, at the age of 18, I did my first tour of Northern Ireland and got shot at for the first time.
So what was your temperament at that time, respective? You're looking to your left, you look to your right. I mean, is it all young lads like you, or are they older, 4 or 5 years older, some veterans probably? What was your thought? Did you have this attitude like, I'm a Jack the lad, the world is mine and I'm going to do what I need?
No. When I joined my battalion was already in Northern Ireland, 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment. So I went to Flack Street Mill in the Ardoyne in West Belfast. And I turned up with my bags to join the battalion. They were always halfway through the tour. They were already halfway through the tour. And I walked in, put my bags down, and an Irish Lance Corporal, whose name evades me, walked up to me and said, "You're Horsfall, right?" And I went, yeah. And he punched me straight in the face. And he said, I hear you're a gobshite. Keep your mouth shut. All right. And I'm laying on the floor thinking that was my welcome to the battalion, in complete shock because it was totally unexpected. There was no warning. And I got up and walked into my sleeping area, which were bunk beds, one above the other, tiered beds, and started to put my gear on my bed. And a guy came up to the right. My fists went up straight away. You know, I was like, it's not going to happen again. And it was one of my friends, Jimmy Street. And he said, well, Rob, it's me. It's fine. It's Jimmy. I went, okay, you know, calm down. And over in the corner, there was my new corporal, a man called Rooster Barber. And he was sat with a long-playing record player, and he was learning Spanish in the corner. And I was so impressed by that because I'd walked in and been confronted by this complete idiot who punched me in the face. There was the brutality. And yet on the other side, there was this person who was a corporal, 2 ranks above me, sitting in the corner learning Spanish. And you had this amazing mix of people. You know, you had these people who were, but the one thing that bonded them all together, the one essential factor that made us all paratroopers, was that we would all fight. So everything else was secondary to the fact that you're a paratrooper, you're airborne, your primary role in life is to fight. And if you won't fight, then you shouldn't be here. And that's the end of it. And I came to learn that over gradually over a period of time. Unfortunately, they turned me into a person that could do exactly that in the right circumstances.
That's fantastic. I mean, you had that focus, that commitment that some people, they waffle. They're not really sure. Yeah, I'll check this job out for 3 or 4 years. You know, I mean, it'll pay for my college or, you know, it'll keep me occupied until I get out and I'm a fishmonger or whatever it is. But you knew, so you're committed. So tell me about the 3 operational tours. How was that? And so let me lead into that. Were you a person of some kind of practicing faith going into there? And was that difficult for you, or was it difficult for you to understand Catholicism, Protestantism, and did you even have a view? Maybe you didn't have a care in the world. Didn't
well, let's start with the faith thing. When I was a kid, I went to church on Sundays until I was about 11 or 12, and then I lost interest in it. And by the age of 14, with the difficulties in my life, I decided that I was an atheist. I didn't believe in God. That was it. It didn't exist. You know, what a stupid thing. And when I joined the junior service, we had church parades every Sunday, and I declared to the padre that I was an atheist, and he just patted me on the shoulder and let me join in anyway, or forced me to join in anyway. And so I didn't have much of an understanding of religion or faith or what it believed. I did hear people coming out with phrases like "we're all sinners," and but underneath that there was a foundation that had come from my very, very early childhood, where the fundamentals of the Christian teachings had been introduced to my brain very, very early on. And as the years, I arrived in Northern Ireland knowing very little, being English, about the issues between the Catholic and Protestant communities there. If you were Scottish, you understood it very well because it existed there as well. But it's a 500-year-old Irish problem between Catholicism and Catholicism, and Catholicism. And get my tongue back in the right place, Catholicism. And so I went there, being English, it made you completely neutral. If somebody had a gun and he was pointing at you, shot him, didn't care which side it was. And we're very, very neutral because we went there to stop the two sides from killing each other and erupting into a civil war. Well, you'll know if you're ever involved in any kind of domestic dispute between two people that live together and you get in the middle, they'll both turn and attack you for getting in the way. And so the British Army stayed there for 30 years. And we took an awful lot of casualties trying to prevent these two secular communities from killing one another, two religious communities from killing one another, and did a fairly good job in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. We were attacked in our homes in the United Kingdom. We were attacked in military barracks abroad. We were, people were blown up in pubs, people blown up on the streets. on the mainland as well as in Northern Ireland, there's a terrible system of criminal murder in many cases from both sides, not just from one side. But eventually, it became the provisional IRA that formed because of a system of bad politics, and ended up being predominantly a war against Catholic terrorists. But if you go back right to the very beginning, the British Army went there to protect Catholics from the abuses of the majority Protestant population. So it's a very, very complicated story. And if people are going to have opinions about it across the Atlantic, then they really, really should do their research before they do. And if they're going to contribute to a cause, then they should really understand the whole history of Ireland and where it begins and where it finishes. And there's still division there now, but that division exists because politicians in Northern Ireland get their votes from maintaining the division between the communities. And that's quite sad as well. Later in life, I developed a fairly strong belief in God, and not from war and not from frightening circumstances, but from personal experience and from deep introspection. And I don't belong to a religious faith. I believe in the Christian teachings. I've prayed in mosques, I've prayed in Buddhist temples, I've been to Sikh temples, I've read the teachings of Bhai Rama, I've read the Quran, I've read the Bible. I've read, if you read the Old Testament, it means you've read the Torah as well. So, and they all pretty much say the same things in terms of how people should behave. Don't nick people's stuff and don't hurt people unless it's absolutely necessary. And it boils down to that. But I also know that when I'm under deep pressure for really bad circumstances, and they continue to happen in everybody's life, I often go and sit in one of those great temples and ask for help. And the answers will usually come. So, yeah, I have a deep and strong belief in the existence of that great deity that can be given many names.
It's fantastic to have some type of guiding principles that help you. And so what was it like out the gateway? You know, your first mission with the Northern Ireland. What was that like? Can you take me to some incidents, anything memorable that stands out to kind of put the hair on your neck?
Okay, well, I remember the first time I got shot at was just one shot by a sniper from a distance. It cracked above my head. And I jumped out the back of a moving vehicle and rolled backwards, forgetting that the vehicle was still going in the other direction, and got into cover and cocked my weapon and covered my buddies as they got out of the vehicle. And then we progressed up the street and did a quick follow-up and found absolutely nothing. But I was very pleased with myself because my training had kicked in. I'd done all the right things. And it was only when I got back to barracks I realized there was a massive bruise on my knee, and I was limping around, and my hands were shaking, not from fear, but just from the adrenaline rush that had come from it. But it was wonderful. I mean, I'd already been a soldier for 2 years, nearly 3, when that happened. On my second tour of Northern Ireland, I was in the Blay-Miezah, one of the hardest, toughest, poorest places in West Belfast. And on one occasion, I was out on patrol, January the 7th, 1977. And I laid on the ground in the dark to cover another patrol going into a drinking bar to ask questions. And I rested the magazine of my rifle on the ground, and it scraped on something metallic. I pushed away some grass and realized that I was laying on a claymore mine. And it was a galvanized bucket buried in the ground facing a post office wall. So I ran around the corner, told my patrol commander, Pete Light, that I'd been laying on a bomb. He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm absolutely sure." And he called it in on the radio. And a captain who was in charge of the other patrol came across and said he didn't believe that I'd seen what I'd seen. So he said, "Take me to it." And I said, "Well, for crying out loud, we've had all this training about don't go near to an improvised explosive device. Once you found it, get away, cordon off the area, don't go near it." And he said, "Well, I want to go and see it. I don't believe it's there." So I said, well, I'm not going. And he said, well, you'll do as you're told. And he ordered me to do it. So I had to do it. So he crawled across the ground and I crawled across behind him with my eyes closed, my fingers in my ears. And he tied a piece of string to this damn thing and he tried to try and pull it out of the ground. Hence, going back to my story about complete idiots and some absolute geniuses at the same time in the same regiment. And it wouldn't move. So he came back and he said it won't move and called in the ammunition technical officer. And it was a galvanized bucket with 20 pounds of homemade explosive, 2 ounces of Franjex, an electric detonator, and 200 meters of wire going across into a place called the Turf Lodge. And somebody had tried to initiate the bomb. But in them days, you had big, huge square batteries that threw 9 volts. And it was January, it was about 10 degrees below zero, and it just didn't have the power to initiate the detonator. So it didn't go off. But discovering it, we actually, if it had gone off, it would have killed a 4-man patrol going along that wall without any doubt at all. And it was packed in with all the iron castings, big chunks of iron from left over from car scrap. So that was an interesting one. We had other occasions when I was on my 3rd tour in South Armagh, the odd sniper shot from a distance. I had a young, I was considered to be an old boy by then. I was coming up towards 21, 3rd tour of Northern Ireland. And I had a young 18-year-old private called Shane Scott, who was my number 2 on the machine gun. And we got shot at a couple of times, and he would always be there with the belt ready to feed into the gun. We never had to return fire. We never get to see who was shooting at us. Wonderful experience. And I got back from Northern Ireland early because I'd volunteered to go to the Special Air Service. And Scotty, as we called him, his parachute failed on a jump just after they returned, and he died the day after his 19th birthday, which was, quite choking. But, you have a few drinks for your lost comrades and you move on. The Parachute Regiment lost an awful lot of soldiers in Northern Ireland, 22 on one day at Warren Point, where they were hit by an ambush and then hit by a secondary ambush when the Quick Reaction Force turned up, killed 22 guys in one day. So, the idea that some people abroad have that, as a military occupation and martial law, that's so far from the truth. We were there to support the police, to keep people from erupting into civil war and murdering one another. And it was a difficult job. I did 2 further tours of Northern Ireland undercover with the Special Air Service later on, without very much exciting happening. Far more things that were excited happened when you were a soldier in uniform on the streets than when you were working undercover. Working undercover is extraordinarily dangerous, but you don't get a lot of contact with the public. So I had those 5 tours. In between, we had the Falklands War as well, and my famous raid on the Iranian Embassy in London in 1980.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. We're going to get into that. How was the Falklands for you? Was that I read about the Operation Mikado, but what happened there?
Well, Operation Mikado was my operation.
Mm-hmm.
And my squadron was going to fly down on 2 C-130 Hercules aircraft, land on the runways, one of 2 runways in Argentina, destroy the Super Étendard jets that were firing Exocet missiles and sinking our capital ships, and then get killed or captured. That was our mission. My wife was 8 months pregnant with our first child. I put that aside once I went off to do the job. We got halfway there, and Ronald Reagan put pressure on Margaret Thatcher not to extend the war onto the mainland. And so we were delayed, and then we were delayed again, and the combined forces working alone, the British Air Force, Navy, and Army had arrived. They were defeating the Argentinians. The Navy had sunk the Belgrano and put the Argentinian Navy back into dock. They couldn't move, and our mission eventually got cancelled. But the fact that we were on the aircraft, prepared to go, prepared to do it, is quite an important factor in that. We got there, we got there late in the war, and the plan was for us to do a raid on Port Stanley from the sea to assist and distract the Argentinians and assist the Paras and Marines that were approaching at great speed across the mountains towards Stanley. And when we parachuted into the sea, we put all our equipment into containers, and the parachutes were attached on them by the Royal Air Force. We were supposed to jump into the sea. The Navy would pick us up. We'd reorganize and then go and do our mission. All the parachutes came off the equipment. So we bombed our own ships with our own equipment, and most of it went to the bottom of the ocean. So we arrived in the Falklands and only with no equipment, all our kit at the bottom of the sea, on a ship, waiting to see what was going to happen next. And the enemy surrendered. So very scary. But in the end, we didn't do a great deal, but he also serves who stands and waits, as the saying goes. And I got home 10 days later because I was going back on the counter-terrorist team, and met my 10-day-old son for the first time. So coming back from war with a new baby that I thought I would never see. He's 42 years old now. I'm actually quite pleased that the operation never went ahead.
Beautiful story. Let's go back to 78, and what I want to get into is your mentals. So you did SAS selection and you failed your first, but you retained your second attempt. So what was that like? I mean, did you have mentors? Did you struggle? Some people like, that's it for me, I'm done. What were your thoughts going in? And how did you change? Did you shift as a man? Because for us, and I think even for the U.S. military, I mean, a lot of what's out there, we don't have social media like we do today, and so a lot of it's legend, it's myth. You see these grainy black and white training videos, and you see soldiers in Hollywood color. Yet it's only in the movies, the big stuff. You don't really get a lot of content. Now it's all over the place. Everybody's on podcasts, but for you, I mean, that's legend, man. I mean, going in. I mean, we know nothing about it.
Well, the Special Air Service, when it was formed in the Second World War, was a raiding team, essentially. Their main mission was small operations behind enemy lines and raiding. And then they were disbanded after the Second World War and reformed during the Malayan emergency in the 1950s as the Malayan Scouts. Very much as reconnaissance troops, small teams of four or five men in the jungle, finding enemy camps and then bringing in the infantry to attack those camps. And they did such a terrific job that it reformed as a regular part of the British Army, called the Special Air Service, 22 Special Air Service Regiment. And very much a place for people who didn't fit in. People whose heads were the wrong shape to do well in the normal regular army, people who wanted to get away for a while or wanted to do something more exciting. But as the years went by, Special Air Service developed into more than just a reconnaissance group. They were given the task of being the British counter-terrorist team. And at the same time, their selection process got more and more difficult. The selection process for the British SAS when I joined in 1978 was a year long. So it takes a year to go from the day you start the selection to the day you actually qualify. And the first month is in the mountains. Everything you do on SAS selection, you do as an individual. Nobody shouts at you, nobody cajoles you, nobody encourages you. You're already supposed to be a trained soldier. You already have to have done at least 3 years regular service. And so if you fail to meet one of the tasks adequately, you simply get on the truck and go back to your old unit the following morning. That's the end of it. Nobody says you passed. Nobody says you failed. It's just, okay, you didn't make it this time. Well, I was 21 years old, a chubby-faced paratrooper who thought he was super fit. And I got to the end, the fourth week. The fourth week is test week. And test week is 5 days of marches alone over the Welsh mountains, which are very wet and very cold. alone, carrying weights that start at 35 pounds and increase daily up to 55 pounds, plus your weapon, plus your food, plus your water. And the distances start at 18 miles and the final march is 40 miles. And I got to the fourth day, and I had these two big ulcers on my back where my Bergen had been pressing on over the days, and they'd made them, and they were bleeding. And it was wet, and I was alone, and I was losing my self-confidence. And I started to think about the 40-mile march that was coming on the next day. And with the pain, with the bleeding, with the lack of confidence, I returned to the last checkpoint and voluntarily withdrew. And I went to check in the next morning with the major in charge. And he said, look, we think you've got great potential. You know, you're doing really well. And the medics have spoken to us. And we think we'd like to keep you here for another 4 months. And you can assist with the team that have passed in their continuation training. And you can have another go in January 1979. Well, I thought, great, that's fantastic. You know, I was really pleased about that, and I took the opportunity very quickly. And for the next few months, I would get up first thing in the morning. I would go down the swimming pool. You had to be able to swim 1,000 meters with clothing on, and I had free access to the swimming pool at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'd go down the swimming pool and train myself to swim that kind of distance, which I couldn't do at the time. And then I'd get back, have some breakfast, do an 8-mile run with my boots on over the hills around Hereford, and then I'd come back and start my working day. And sometimes my working day I had duties to do, taking rations out to the guys who were doing their continuation training, and an awful lot of free time. And I spent that free time in the mountains almost continuously. And there are pictures of me in September 1978 and in January 1979. And it's a difference between this chubby kid and this athlete, and just 4 months of continuous preparation and training. And I look like I'm 3 or 4 years older. And I was ready for it the second time. So I did the 4 weeks in the coldest winter that Britain had known for maybe 20 years, since 1963, and passed the first phase. One of our group died on the endurance day, the fifth day of test week. Then we went off to the jungles of Belize, and we worked in the jungles of Belize in 5-man patrols. Then we come back from there, and we did combat survival instructors course. The last week is sent out on the ground with 2 battalions of troops chasing you, trying to catch you. And at the end of that, you get interrogated, and you're not allowed to say yes, no, or sign a piece of paper. And if you pass that and you're already a paratrooper, then you get your cap badge and you join your squadron. If you're not, you go away and do your basic parachuting course. You haven't passed yet. You're on probation with your squadron. And during the next 6 months, you have to impress them, and you have to pass a personal skill and a troop skill. My personal skill was one of Britain's earliest paramedics, and my troop skill was as a mountain climber. And at the end, on January the 6th, 1980, I got my qualification on paper and my special forces pay, and went on from there. And it was so it's a year long, but it's not like the movies. It's not like the nonsense people see on television with people carrying logs and people shouting at them and punishing them and giving them hundreds of press ups. It's not like that. It's like, you should, if you're good enough to be here, you're good enough to be here. There's the job. Off you go. And no, I'm sorry you didn't make the time. Sorry you didn't make the grade. You go back to where you came from. On my course, 57, the second course, 57 of us started, and only 8 of us passed.
What was that like for you? I mean, it seems, for common sense, it's just normal career progression. You're going from this unit to this unit, and you just get better, and you level up. Some people, it's a job. Others, it's money, opportunity cost. There's nothing waiting on the outside for them. There's something here for me. What was the driving force? Did you hear your stepfather's voice in your head? You're not good enough, like some men. What was the driving thing for you, the reason? I think
the driving force, I referred back to when I had that first 7 years of my life without a father figure. And then I didn't have a good role model after that either. And that made it very, very difficult for me to make friends. If you have struggled to make friends, you get isolated, humiliated, intimidated, bullied. And I was the classic isolated, bullied, lonely kid stuck on the outside, struggling to be part of the group and not realizing that I never would be. So I was driven by a deep-seated sense of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I was driven by the need to prove myself, to prove that I was as good as those people that didn't like me, to those people that isolated me and pushed me away. And I got all my self-esteem from doing my job better than they could do theirs. And some people would claim that that was having a chip on your shoulder. And yes, I probably did. But that was a result of the circumstances of my life. It wasn't a case of being big-headed or a brigadier. It was merely a case of how adversity had developed my character up to that point.
Now let's talk about Operation Nimrod. It's fantastic. 6 days kind of lays it out for us, for the audience, and we see it. I want to get into the detail. I want to drill down if we can, because when we see it, and it's fantastic. We see lots of movies like Bank Heist or, hostage, takeovers, even the movie Heat, right? You get this breakdown with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, and we see that, and it's kind of a view into it. Where were you at when the information comes over the TV? What were you doing? Well, and take me into the details. I want to get that big, deep dive.
We'd returned from Northern Ireland in early 1980, B Squadron, 22 SAS. And our job then was to take over the rotation to become the next counter-terrorist team. Each squadron rotated through the job every 6 months. So it wasn't like a special unit selected from the unit to do that job. Everybody did it. You just took turns. We'd finished our training and handover period. And only a few weeks later, at the end of April 1980, 6 Arabistani terrorists took over the Iranian Embassy in London and captured 24 hostages, 5 of whom were British, including one police officer, a diplomatic protection group member called Trevor Locke. We got the information, not as one would imagine through military intelligence or some special source. We got the information over the national radio from the British Broadcasting Service when it was announced over the radio that this incident had taken place in London. And so we were actually getting ready to drive to Edinburgh in Scotland, which is 400 miles away, to carry out a practice training session with the police. Well, clearly that was postponed, and we just sat and waited for more news, and believing that we were going to be deployed on the first ever such operation. Our OC, Hector Gullen, told us to go home, get some more washing and shaving gear. It might, we might be down in London shortly, and it might last a bit longer than we expected. So I went home on my bicycle, grabbed some extra washing and shaving gear and a few bits and pieces, and left a note on the mantelpiece to my then girlfriend that said, won't be home on Wednesday. If you want to know where I am, watch the TV. And that night, we still didn't get permission to move. So our Colonel, Mike Rose, later Sir General Mike Rose, decided that it'd be a good idea to get us closer to London so that we didn't have the 2 to 3 hour journey to get there. So we moved to Beaconsfield late on that first night, which is 25 miles outside London, to a place where the Army Education Corps was based, and arrived in the early hours of the morning. Now, because we'd been undercover in Northern Ireland and we still had to be fairly anonymous, we tended to have moustaches that drooped down here, which was the fashion at the time, and lots of hair. Believe it or not, I had lots of hair once upon a time. And so we looked more like Mexican bandits than we did like soldiers. And they're just missing the sombreros. And we arrived in this canteen in the early hours of the morning, and the sergeant major that was in charge of the canteen, the chef, didn't know that we were arriving, and nobody had told him. So he strutted into the canteen, and we're all sit there, all these SAS soldiers, drinking cups of tea and waiting to be told what to do. And he came in and started shouting at us and asking us what we were doing. And one of our team leaders, David Juster, told him to go and speak to the junior officer. Well, David was about 6'2", and this little fat chef was about 5'6", and he stuck his finger up towards David's nose and said, "This is my canteen, and I'll do what I like, and I want to know who you are, and you'll answer my questions." And David put his finger back on his nose and said, "I'm Captain David Juster of 22nd Special Air Service, and if you don't F off and go and talk to the duty officer, I'm going to lock you up right now." And you could see this little round man waddling out the door in shame, and they left us alone for the rest of the night. Early the next morning, we got permission to move into London, and we moved to Regent's Park Barracks, which is on Tottenham Court Road, and just a couple of miles from where the incident had taken place. And again, waiting for permission from the government to get closer, and waiting for permission from the police, because it's illegal, as it is in Canada and in the USA, for military operations to take place on the mainland without government permission, special government permission. Everything comes under the auspices of the police, and quite rightly so. So permission had to be obtained from the Home Office and from the police. And on the second night, we moved into the building next door, which was the Royal College of General Practitioners. So from the time the incident began, maybe 36, 48 hours later, we were next door to them, in the building next door. And we had to prepare what's called an immediate action. So if they start killing people right now, we have to go in and do the best we can. So there was a whole squadron of us. There was 48 operational badge troops and our support arms, so about 60 altogether. And we were given areas of responsibility. There were 6 floors, including the basement, 55 rooms, and each 8-man group was given a floor each. Okay, if it all goes bad now, that's your area, that's your place to get to. Get in the best you can, kill the terrorists, save as many hostages as you can, and get out alive. And that's the immediate action. That's where you start. We had 50% of us fully dressed with all our equipment on, ready to go, and 50% down to our overalls and sleeping. And then the days progressed until we got to the 6th day. And on the 6th day, they hadn't killed anybody. Several of the hostages had been released with negotiations. One had bluffed that he was very, very ill and got out. A pregnant woman was let out. And a man called Mustafa Karkuti, who was a Syrian British journalist, a wonderful man. And they let him go because he'd done such a wonderful job in keeping things calm inside. So we were left with 20 hostages inside, 6 terrorists, and one of those hostages was a policeman. On the 6th day, the terrorists became frustrated and executed the charge d'affaires to the embassy, a man called Lavazani, and threw his body out just after 6 o'clock in the evening on the 5th of May. And at that point, Margaret Thatcher said, "Okay, they've killed somebody, now you can go ahead with your military operation." And 40 minutes later, after a final brief, we approached the building with a view to having a silent approach, placing our explosive devices on the windows and doors. And when everybody was ready, all six groups were ready, we would then make a fast entry and hit every floor at exactly the same time. However, during the approach, one of the guys abseiling down the back of the building onto the 2nd floor balcony put his foot through a window and got his glove caught in his abseil harness. So he couldn't go up or down, and he broke a window. Salim, the leader of the terrorist group, was speaking to the negotiator, Max Farnham. He heard a suspicious noise and said so, and said he was going to investigate. The commanding officer, realizing that we'd been compromised, called an early go, go, go. And on the famous footage that you can find on YouTube, on the front balcony, you suddenly see John McAleese and Tom McDonald leap over the balcony, place a frame charge on the window quickly, and explode it when they're only a few feet away from it and take the windows out. They did that quickly because suddenly the operation had changed. On the back door where I was, we hadn't had time to lay any charges. So my comrade and best man, Bob Curry, took an 8-pound sledgehammer and took the doors out on the back ground floor. They let the explosives off on the roof. They entered the basement, and they entered the back floor balcony, abseiling past the man who was stuck. I'm standing underneath on the ground floor looking up at the balcony where the man is stuck. The team that's gone in have thrown their flashbangs inside, and the curtains have caught fire. The curtains are now burning. There's a man hanging above those curtains, stuck on his rope, and he's starting to turn into the latest version of a barbecue. He's also got the pressure switch on his radio jammed shut, so nobody can communicate. So it looks like everything is going wrong. One of the troops beneath him, Tommy Palmer, has gone through the window. His head has caught fire because of the curtains burning. He's come back out, taken his gas mask off, put the flames out, and gone back into the gas without a gas mask, and shoots 2 terrorists on the inside of the telex room. Meanwhile, Tom Morell is still burning above the flames. He's kicking himself out on this rope under tension. The guys on the roof that are left on the roof are trying to cut the rope, but they've got to get it on the inswing, because if he drops on the outswing, he's going to drop 30 feet down into solid concrete. I'm watching this, and 3 rounds, this is all in a few seconds, 3 rounds go through a window, out a window over my head, and come out from the inside. I wonder where they're from. I'm looking at Tom burning, nothing can happen. He drops, they cut the rope, he drops onto the balcony, the radio comes on. Hector, who's in charge, thinking that it's all gone wrong, tells me and my partner to go in quickly. We go in on the ground floor into the lobby area. Communications is restored. We're expecting mayhem because there's noise, there's explosions, there's gas, and there's a chain of men going from the ground floor up the stairs. And the first hostage coming down the stairs is our priority, which is the British policeman, Trevor Locke. He comes clearing the gas. I grab him, pass him out to the next person. Out he goes. Then the hostages start to come down the stairs. And there's still gunfire. There's still flames. There's still burning. There's still gas. As they start to come down the stairs, they're mostly women. And they're petrified. And we want to keep them petrified. So they do exactly as they're told. And we pass them man to man, man to man, man to man. And out they go, out the back door. And then on the stairs, there's a kerfuffle, a scuffle, as somebody shouts, he's a terrorist. And somebody gets butt swiped on the stairs. And I'm looking up across the stairs. And this man staggers slightly and comes clear at the bottom of the stairs. And as he does, there's a man standing, one of my comrades standing about 12 inches from him at this point. And it's clear, and it's clear that this guy's got a hand grenade. And so he opens fire exactly the same time as I open fire. I fire 3 rounds, he fires 24 rounds. And I think my contribution was a bit superfluous. But anyway, the guy falls to the ground with 27 holes in him, and the grenade rolls across the floor with the pin still in it. Upstairs, 1 hostage has been killed during the entry phase by a terrorist. 5 terrorists, including the one at the bottom of the stairs, has been killed. 19 hostages have been evacuated from the building, and we get out, and 1 terrorist has managed to sneak out amongst the hostages. The building's cleared. I'm the last man out of the building because I was the last man into it. I'm the last man out of the building. I go down onto the grass to assist with the control of the hostages. And Sim Harris, a BBC reporter who was a hostage, is shouting, he's a terrorist, and pointing at Fauzi Najad, who was lying on the floor not far from him. And me and one of my comrades, Tony, we pick him up and we take him, separate him from the hostages. Some people have suggested ridiculously over the years that we intended to take him back inside and execute him, which would have been an absolute disaster and completely against policy and the dumbest thing you could ever do with the whole world watching you. Anyway, we separated him, moved him away from them, put him on the ground. And from the time the go was given, it took us 7 minutes to carry out that complete operation. Nobody had heard of the Special Air Service at that time. We were Fred Carno's army, stuck in darkest Herefordshire. There was only 250 of us with about 250 support arms. William Whitelaw, the Home Secretary, came in afterwards and said, I knew you'd do a good job, but I never knew it would be this good. They were expecting to lose 50% of the hostages if we went in, and we lost one. He wanted to take us out in front of the world's press and parade us. And we said, no, we don't do that. And we sneaked packed all our equipment, sneaked into the back of a big yellow Pantechnicon truck and slid away silently to Regent's Park Barracks, where we met Margaret Thatcher later in the day and watched ourselves on the news with her, and then got back to Hereford that night and prepared all our equipment ready for potentially another operation, which may have occurred at any time in the next few days. And the job was done, and we didn't want to us, it was just a job. But to the world, it was one of the most amazing things that had ever happened, bearing in mind that only 10 days before, the Americans had messed up Operation Eagle's Claw. And sadly, some of their best operators had been killed because the operation was too big, it had gone wrong, and the Iranians had paraded the bodies of those brave American soldiers through the streets and on the international news. So 10 days later, the world's morale was at an extraordinary low level. And then we came along and showed, yes, you can defeat these people. Yes, you can stand up to them. And this is how you do it.
Yeah, fantastic story. I know you guys are able to do a hot wash. I mean, clearly we have the movie, we have legend, we have history here. And so they talk to all of you guys and you say, well, this is what happened. This is my part. It's Rusty's part. That's everybody's part. And so you get all this intel, you put it together. Where were you thinking? What were you thinking? Wishes, I could have did this better. I could have did that better. I mean, were you working through some mental gymnastics in your head about?
I think the only thing I was thinking about during the approach and during the operation is make sure you do everything you've been trained to do, everything you're supposed to do, because if you don't, you're going to let somebody down. Somebody could die because you didn't do your part. And everybody did their part. And where things went wrong, and people put them right. And that's the most important thing about having highly trained operatives. When something unexpected happens, when the guy gets stuck on his rope, when the signal's around, everybody knew their job and everybody did their job. And we got the result regardless of that, because plans never go to plan. Things always change, things always go wrong. And especially with military operations. And it's when things go wrong that the real test of the character of the people comes into play, not when everything goes right.
I totally agree. It's order breeds, comfort, and chaos breeds genius. So it's something that you guys clearly, you executed, you did it. It's fantastic. Great story. Now I've got a story for you, and please, I hope you know the answer to it, because maybe I'm imagining this. Maybe this is something I saw in a dream. I don't recall, but I've heard a story that Princess Diana came out to see you guys train, and you guys pulled a prank, and they had a chopper up in the sky, and there was supposed to be an SAS guy coming down, but they threw a dummy out, a chopper, and everyone's horrified, and all of a sudden there's a man hiding behind a parapet, and he gets up in black and he waves, and it's playing a prank. It was a dummy they threw out. Is that a true story?
Yeah, it's a true story, but it wasn't Princess Diana. It was Princess Anne who was visiting on that occasion. The Princess Diana story was a couple of years later when she and Charles came down, now King Charles. And we persuaded them that it'd be a great idea to dress them up in overalls and for them to drive two of our Range Rovers up to a practice building so we could do a practice assault and they could take part. And it was a very simple task. They just drive the vehicles up, we throw the ladders up, and away we go with our flashbangs and pyrotechnics. But unbeknown to us, Diana had wound the window down a little bit to let some air in. And she had lacquer on her hair. One of the pyrotechnics went off and her hair started to catch fire. And a guy called Jin Jung opened the door, pulled her out, and put the flames out, and I thought I'll have a piece of that, and helped a little bit. No, you don't get the opportunity every day to give a princess a good slapping, you know. So I'm joking, guys. I'm joking.
Yeah.
And so we put the flames out, and she had this famous round haircut, you know, very very common at the time. And so during the lunch break, she was fine. Her face and skin wasn't singed, but obviously a bit upset. And during the lunch break, we got a hairdresser from Hereford to come in and trim away the singed areas of her hair. So she ended up with this page boy cut with the narrow sides and full head of hair on the top. And that was in Vogue magazine, and the world suddenly went crazy for this new Princess Diana hairstyle, courtesy of the Special Air Service, but nobody knew it was us that designed it. So that was the two stories mixed up there, yeah. But the thing about throwing the dummy out the helicopter, yeah, that was when Princess Anne was visiting, and she's still a very cool cookie. Somebody, when she comes into the room, she's got presence. She asks poignant questions. She doesn't ask the dumb visitor questions. Very impressive lady. Princess Diana at the time was very young. They'd only just got married. She was a real sweetheart. And it was extraordinarily sad when she died.
Well, that links you to Dodi Al-Fayed. So let's talk about that separation. So what was the trigger, the mechanism, something that you said, you know, my time is done here and I'm going to go and work for myself. I'm going to become a bodyguard. I mean, what was the impetus for that?
Well, I was, as far as I was concerned, I was going to be a soldier for the full 24 years.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in my first 3 years in the Special Air Service, I'd upset a person who was a sergeant. He told some lies, I'd complained, and he resented that and held it against me. And he eventually became the squadron sergeant major. And he made it his personal mission to hold back my career and to get me thrown out after the end of my second 3-year period, which he succeeded in doing. And I knew that I'd been stitched up, set up, and so before, I wasn't going to allow them to send me home with my tail between my legs. I had a second child on the way. I had a mortgage on my house. I had a family in Hereford. My girlfriend had become my wife, and I wasn't going to sit down and allow them to control my future. So I took control myself and put in my papers and paid some money to buy myself out of the British Army early. It was basically, it was that. I know where this is going. Mm-hmm. And I went into the colonel's office, and he said, well, explain to me why you broke every rule in the book. I said, I never broke any. And then he said, yes, well, okay, you haven't done anything wrong this time. He said, but you've been walking on a razor blade for a long time. I have no alternative to send you back to the Parachute Regiment. And then you don't have to be a lawyer to realize that he's just said, you haven't done anything wrong, but I'm going to punish you anyway. So I said, well, that's all right. So I put my papers in to buy out yesterday. He said, don't do that. The wind blows cold on the outside. I said, it doesn't blow too warm in here, does it? Mm. And he got most annoyed about that. And I was out of the British Army in 2 weeks, which was unfortunate, but it freed me up to explore my full potential in a different direction. So sometimes the worst things that happen in your life end up being the best. And the first job I had was working for Mohammed al-Fayed, bodyguarding him, and Dodi Al-Fayed in London. And I quite liked Mohammed al-Fayed. He treated me very, very well. But, close protection, bodyguarding is mostly prestige with people like that, rather than there's a threat to their life. And I used to go out with Dodi when he would come across from New York, and take him out to Harry's bar. He was going out with Michelle Pfeiffer and Goose Stark and other famous people at the time. And after a while, having been a soldier from the age of 15 to the age of 27, and all these other exciting adventures, it got a bit dull. It got a bit boring. And so I took on, I then went off to Sri Lanka to be a mercenary training officer for the Sinhalese army in Sri Lanka, working against the Tamil Tigers in Jaffna in the north. But realized very, very quickly that I was on the wrong side, because there was a terrible genocide taking place there. They were wiping out villages, massacring innocent civilians, behaving absolutely appallingly. And the officers that I were training were coming back and complaining to us about it. Well, I was powerless to do anything except resign, so I resigned and came home, and life goes on. Went on from bodyguarding job to bodyguarding job, and you realize after a while that you're getting older, but you're not getting any new qualifications. And as new guys start to leave the British Armed Forces, they're fresher, they're more current, they're going to be the better choice, and they haven't learned to say no yet. Well, one of the things I learned after a couple of years out of the army was to say no. No, I'm not doing that. Where's the extra pay? Do I get overtime? And the skills that civilians have right from the beginning that soldiers don't have. So my marriage developed. I had more kids, and eventually I'd had enough, and I started teaching children martial arts in West London, and built it from a group of 3 up to a group of over 1,000, aged between the age of 4 and 15, imparting knowledge, taking the experiences of my early life, taking my understanding of bullying, and building the whole process on not on competition and winning points and competitions and prizes, but on good manners, self-discipline, and respect for parents and teachers, and developing their character and teaching them how to actually genuinely defend themselves, and making them strong people. Because I honestly believe that if you give a person self-discipline and confidence, that they'll end up being a much kinder person as they grow. Because real strength comes from real strength and kindness. They're two sides of the same coin. They really belong together, very much so. Strong leaders have never really forget the foundations that they're building themselves on: decency, kindness, firmness combined with that. They're very, very important. I see that in some world leaders even today, and I'm very, very hopeful for the future of the United States because of those people of example that are coming back into the limelight in the last week.
Fantastic. So now, how do you get the job as a bodyguard? I mean, you have a firm that manages you. It's not like you just throw your CV down and said, "Hey, give me a job." But is it your reputation speaks for yourself, or with Nimrod coming off that, or how does that work to get placed?
Well, the idea of contract soldiering and mercenaries back in when I left the British Army, which is in November 1984, there was a very, very small market, a few niche contracts around the world, in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Asia, and they were very small, high prestige jobs, and they were predominantly for people who'd come out of the Special Air Service, and there was the ex-Special Air Service guys set up these companies, and they picked you up as soon as you left the door. And that's what happened to me. So I walked straight out of the army and straight into one of these jobs. As the years have developed and we've seen Iraq and big companies arrive, and countries avoiding the draft by bringing in private mercenaries in large numbers, poorly trained, doing jobs unofficially, that's very much swung the pendulum in the other direction. Now it's swinging back again because a lot of those things are finished, and a lot of people got very, very rich from them. But it's got back to small jobs, small prestige jobs again. But at that time, it was just maybe a couple of hundred guys, and we used to call it the circuit, because you'd leave one job, go into another one where somebody had left, and he'd move around, and it'd go around. We'd all be moving around a little circle, paying the bills, doing the things that we understood very, very well. And they're not mercenary jobs in the sense of paid killers. They're mercenary jobs in the sense of paid instructors for foreign armies. That's what the real role was. But very often you got sucked into the combat, as I did when I went down to Mozambique.
How did that work for you when you saw the movie The Wild Geese? I mean, that came out in '78, and for a lot of people, I mean, I still love the movie. Saw it when I was a child. And, do you think the technical advisors did a bang-up job? I mean, what are your thoughts on that one?
I think they did a terrific job. And one of the most realistic things is of the major, who's it, Richard Burton, turning up in his raincoat, looking rather scruffy, and finding his old sergeant major digging up potatoes in the garden. That is so real. That is so accurate. That is exactly what the guys are like. You get a guy who spends all day in the killing house, fires 400 rounds and practicing taking somebody out with headshots from 5 meters with a pistol, and then he goes home and works on his garden. This is the real world. I had a guy, a very good friend who I won't name, who used to get me to walk him home when we'd had a few drinks so that his wife didn't tell him off. The real people. They're not Rambos who sharpen knives when they get home and glare at people. And I do hate the characterizations of special forces soldiers that get into these movies. Like they're dogs that are only let out of the cage when somebody wants to release them, and worship their masters who have got pips on their shoulders. It's real and bars on their collars. It's not that way at all. They're real, genuine human beings who love their kids, have the same problems everybody else have in their marriages, have the problems of life with money and so on, and deal and cope with them. And they're soldiers as well. So it's not the way. It's never the way. If they made a real movie about SAS selection, it'd probably be the dullest movie in the world.
I would think a lot of people still watch it. I'll tell you, a lot of great stuff that you guys have done. So let's talk about the direction you went with book writing. That's fascinating to me. And I think that's just the culmination of your whole life. It's just, again, that wonderful story arc from a boy without a father to a man who's a wizard warrior and dispensing wisdom. Because, you have the Hollywood tropes, the Rambo, who's just this misunderstood person. And look, most of the greatest corporations are run by veterans. They're quite stable. They're quite capable people. But for you, you went a direction where you wrote a couple books, Fighting Scared, the wise words of the words of a wise paratrooper, the warrior poet. Is that right? Yeah, the warrior poet. Fantastic. So take me on that journey, because I think it's fantastic that you decided to distill all of your knowledge and pass it on to people. How did that come up?
Yeah, I mean, vocationally, the thing that really has always stuck with me was this skill that I learned at the age of 17 of standing in front of a group of people imparting knowledge. I love to teach. I'm a public speaker now. I stand in front of audiences, corporations, schools, colleges, travel around the world a little bit, and I impart knowledge to people. Books were another way of imparting that knowledge. And when I wrote Fighting Scared, which is my autobiography up to about the age of 45, I wanted to tell the story about the young, bullied, insecure, unpopular kid who manages to achieve these things and overcome his problems. That was the real motivation for me telling that story. It wasn't about being the big tough guy. It wasn't about showing, do you know who I am? It was about saying, this is who I really am. And when I first started to write the book, my editor was my wife, Heather. And I wrote the first few chapters, and I took it to her and said, what do you think? And she came back to me and she said, excuse me for saying this, but she said, this is a quote. She said, this is shit. I said, why? What's wrong with it? She said, it's a military report. It's just a series of facts and times and what happened. There's no color in it. There's no feeling. There's no emotion. There's no love in there. What was your mother doing the day you left home? Was the sun shining through the window? What color was the wall? She said, well, how did you feel? And then I sat down and started to write the book properly with her help. And on many occasions, it was a very cathartic experience. I started to cry on the paper. It took me 6 years to write Fighting Scared. And it took me, it's one thing to write a book. It's another skill entirely to sell it. And I had to have it cut down by a proofreader, not a proofreader, by a sub-editor, from 120,000 words to 100,000 words. And then it sold immediately. And I was so excited because it had taken 6 years to write. Now, when you get a carpenter that comes to your house, he'll put the shelves up in 20 minutes. If you try to do it yourself, it'll take you 4 hours and 4 attempts. And so I loved writing. I loved the result of what I'd done, but I didn't want to take 6 years to write a book. I didn't want to take 4 days to put up some shelves. And I got to the age of 52 and I broke my neck in training. I got a fractured vertebra up here, C5, and I could no longer teach martial arts, which I'd been doing for 20 years. And I had to stop, and I had to hand over my business to my oldest son, Alex, who was 27 at the time. And I had to find a way of keeping myself busy and doing something productive while I was recovering from this damaged neck. I wasn't paralyzed. I had some loss of feeling in my hands, but I had pounding headaches. Now, if you have ever had a hangover on a Monday morning and you didn't go to work and the boss phones you, when you answer that phone, your headache disappears. And then when you put the phone down, the headache comes back. I needed something that was going to keep me on the telephone while my neck recovered. And I had no qualifications apart from my paramedic qualifications. And I went to Surrey University, UCAS, and I asked to do a degree course, an honours degree in English literature and creative writing. The only way I could do creative writing was if I did the literature with it. And I spent the next 3 years doing a degree. It was only 20 minutes from home. And my neck recovered during that time. And it kept me focused. And I learned so much about being a carpenter of words. And I still am, because I try to write every day. And they wanted me to stay on, partly for money, but they wanted me to stay on and do a master's. It was very tempting when you've been in academia for 3 years. It really is infectious. And I did enjoy it, but no, I said I wanted to go and write. And so I wanted to write my own stuff, and I wanted to publish my own stuff. So I started by doing the Wise Old Paratrooper anthologies, and they're little tiny booklets, really. And they were fun. They're short stories. They had lots of my maxims and lots of funny short stories and moving short stories. And they taught me how to publish, produce, edit my own work. And then I took one thing that really inspired me during my 3 years, which was the rhythms and forms of poetry. Because poetry is a very powerful medium when it's used well. You can mock people with poetry. You can tell them you love them. You can say things that would embarrass you in any other genre. And you can use it satirically to attack the government. You can do so much with poetry. And there are so many different ways. It's not just rhyming verse. It can be a rant. It can be a sonnet. It can be a love sonnet. It can be an attack on something. And so I put together Warrior Poet, Soldier's Songs, and had it illustrated by a friend of mine called Tommy Brabham. I was living in Prague at the time, and set Tommy off on a new career because he started doing that for me. And I'm really, really proud of that, because poetry doesn't sell well. So it was a labor of love. And then I wrote Slava Ukraini Hude Shares, which is an observational diary of the first 2 years of the Russian-Ukraine war. I wanted to wait until it had come to a conclusion, but it didn't. So I decided to publish it after 2 years. And, I'm very pleased with that. And what else have I written? I don't know. There's 3 Wise Old Paratrooper books, Fighting Scared. That's the lot. And I'm working on a couple of other projects at the moment. One's a novel, which is really hard work. There's Reflections of an Old Man, which are about my experiences in life. Now I'm 67, and how, emotionally you can bring out a hell of a lot of emotion. The one recent piece that's in that book that I published on LinkedIn was How Old Men Say I Love You, which is about a friend of mine who was about to die of pancreatic cancer, called Tony, which, resonates, and, I feel it very strongly even now. So those kind of experiences, bringing those out for other people. But over all of it, even when I stand in front of an audience, it's still about imparting that knowledge, imparting that feeling, giving something to the people that are out there that they can take away with them and go, I feel good about myself. There's nothing wrong with me. And I learned it from that guy there.
Well, that's wonderful. thought, which is that you're able to distill your life into books. And I find, and this is not to disparage Andy McNabb or anybody, it seems like the publishers sex it up and say, well, you've got to, make it more exciting and you've got to do this. But it seems to me that you're a truth teller. You're telling a story from your point of view. But there's also the softening, it appears, that there's a softening of you and your persona, your temperament, and that you're writing poetry. And that's a wonderful thing because, again, we have the Hollywood tropes, the big gorilla. But for you, it's a man who was a hard charger. And then all of a sudden you go into warrior poet, soldier's songs. I mean, did you have favorite poets like Shelley or Blake or Donne or anyone? Is there anyone that you gravitated towards?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few. But I like the war poets.
Mm-hmm.
I like Sassoon.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
I love Kipling. I've got a lot of inspiration from Kipling. But one of the ones that in the book, because I do something that nobody else does in poetry books. I put a little paragraph before the poem or on the illustration page saying what the poem is about and who inspired it, so that somebody's got a clue what it's about before they start to read it. And one of my inspirations was Benny Hill. Benny Hill was a great British comedian.
Loved Benny Hill.
Comedy.
Yeah.
And he used to do lots of really hilarious poems and rhymes and musical pieces. And one was Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West. And I used the rhythms and forms of that poem to in one of my poems, which is an attack on domestic abuse, actually, from somebody I genuinely know. And it's called Dusty Vermin, and it talks about a man who wore a silly hat. And it talks about how his wife leaves him and how she's not going to put up with his crap anymore, but I used the rhythms of Benny Hill's Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West, in that very, very poignant and probing poem. So it's not just the great poets. You can pick things up from other people. Rap poets are great. I don't use rap. It doesn't really resonate with me, but I do like rants, the great speeches that come from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And I do my own rants and just no grammar, just get in there and throw all the words on there, but keep the rhythm going. So you're going and going and going and going and going, and you just don't let it stop until it gets to the end, and then you go stop. That can be quite powerful for poetry.
Yes.
Pantoums. Pantoums are a very clever form of playing with the words and forms. So you take the first two lines and you make them the last two lines in the next stanza, and then the last two lines in the next stanza, but it has to have a different meaning. It really gets stuck into it. But it's powerful. And when I taught the kids up the road in the primary school, and I just taught them about introducing children aged 9 and 10 to poetry, and talked about limericks, which is a great fun way of getting them to engage. But what they really, really clicked onto very quickly was that you could take the mickey out of one another with poetry.
You can
defend yourself with words and the power of words, because words are swords when they're used well, and they're lethal and painful objects if they're used badly as well.
So let's go into some questions I have for you. And basically, this is the track here is dispensing knowledge and the wisdom that you've got. But before I forget, favorite book, is there anything that, like Günter Grass, I mean, any author that really you gravitated to that you liked?
Many,
or a memorable book or something that stuck with you.
Yeah, I love history.
Mm-hmm.
I love reading genuine history, and Band of Brothers is one of those amazingly wonderful books, because it's got the input from the surviving members of that company, of Easy Company, and being a paratrooper as well, you can see the foundations that they were built on with the same foundations that I built on. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and they were true giants. And listening to Major Winter talk until he passed away, and Guarnier and people like that, they're just, and the stories are real. They're not movies. They're truth, they're history as it really was. as the genuine soldiers remembered it. And so I love that. I love reading people's historical speeches. I'm a great admirer of Barack Obama. I love General Petraeus, David Petraeus, and his books. I'm a great fan of a lot of the great generals, and not because of I won this war and I fought that battle and this is how I fought it, but where they're coming from in a personal context. What their foundations were, what their beliefs are, how they move on with their life and use that experience to benefit other people, and how they set such a wonderful example. I coined the mnemonic ICE, ICE, as my three main principles of leadership: integrity, courage, and example. Integrity, courage, and example, ICE. And if anybody has got any leadership potential and they focus on those three things alone, then leadership will follow through. But we always find out who the leaders are when things go wrong, not when they go right.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's talk about imposter syndrome. I've had a couple of guests, and I had John Daly, Marsoc Raider, and I had JTF2 Sean Taylor on, and they said that they always struggle with imposter syndrome. That's not everybody, but a lot of people say that's the unspoken thing. And it seems to me, your private comes in with no experience and he thinks he's the greatest. And yet you have these very capable soldiers at the top who think I could do better. I'm not as good. Where do you sit with that? What are your thoughts on that?
I remember getting into the Parachute Regiment and having a feeling, and then getting into the Special Air Service and having the same feeling, and then being in different parts and different armies of the world and still retaining that feeling. And I still retain it to a degree even now at the age of 67. And that is, do I belong here? Am I bluffing my way? Am I the only person in this environment that's afraid? Am I the only person in this environment that is struggling to cope? Am I the only person that thinks, I shouldn't be here, and I'm not as tough as the rest of these guys. I'm not as capable as the rest of these guys. And then years later, when you become happier in your own skin and you sit with some of those guys that you revered, and you discover that they felt exactly the same way at exactly the same time as you did. And to a certain degree, those of us who are managing and always questioning yourself in that manner are likely to do a hell of a lot more, a very much better considered job than those that are trying to, who think that they're actually genuinely a tough guy and a hard man, because they're going to get defeated by hubris and overconfidence. They're going to make mistakes, more mistakes. We all make mistakes, but they're going to make more mistakes. The danger of having that, as you coin it, imposter syndrome, is that you won't necessarily put yourself forward when you should. And you should. And those of us that suffer, or not suffer, but experience imposter syndrome should always put ourselves forward, always volunteer, always take a leadership role. Because if you don't, somebody far less qualified than you is going to do it instead. And then you're going to wish you had.
How about mentors? Where do they, what role do they play in your life? Did you seek them out? Do you have any mentors that were very notable to you that really had an impact on your life?
I had an awesome desire, having lacked a father figure, to have a good role model, a good mentor in my early years. Rarely found anybody that inspired me in any shape or form until I got to Aldershot, and we had to do this shuffle bar walk across two scaffolding bars 65 feet above the ground with two 4-inch high clamps in the middle. So you had to shuffle out with completely exposed to the world, 65 feet up, shuffle to the middle, step over these two clamps one at a time, they're offset, touch your toes, stand up, say your name, rank and number, shuffle to the end and get down and pass the test. I was 16 years old when I first did this test. I got to the first clamp and my knees started shaking. And I couldn't step over the clamp. And the longer you stand there, the more scared you get. And a physical training instructor called Mick Lee, who was only maybe 4 years older than me, came up from the other side, walked to the center, took my hands, and walked me back to the start point, only about 10 feet long. And he then said, "Come on, son." And he walked backwards across the bars and over the clamps with me following him. He said, "You okay now?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, we'll go around and do it again." He didn't humiliate me. He didn't isolate me. He didn't criticize me. He knew exactly where I was, exactly what my problem was. He led me. He showed me the way. He developed me. And he gave me the courage to go and pass that test. And I went round and did it again. Well, I had to do it as part of a real, genuine test to be a paratrooper 18 months later. It was a walk in the park. But at that moment in time, he led me, he inspired me, and I would have followed him to hell and back for that one experience. And I'm still in touch with him now, 50 years later, and I still think the world of him for that moment. I was a very cynical and lonely young man, so I didn't simply latch on to people. I needed people to prove themselves to me, and very, very few people in my life experience ever did. I've come across the odd teacher. I came across a teacher called Jude Roberts, Jude being short for Judith. And she's a radical feminist and a renowned radical feminist. And she was one of my teachers at university when I was 55 years old. And I had a confrontation with her because she took over my course at short notice and changed the reading list. Well, I bought the books and read the damn reading list early. And now she changed it. I hadn't met her. So they'll get this message from this person called Jude, and I think it's a guy. So I send this very firm complaint into her and arrive on the ground, and she agrees to change some of the reading list back or keep some of the old stuff because I've read it anyway. And I meet her and discover this very, very awesomely intelligent woman who is going to rip me to pieces for the next few months. And she never gave me an inch. Every word I said, I had to justify. Every opinion had to be cited, had to be referenced. Everything I said had to be considered so that I could support it in some way. And she intellectually bullied me for a period of time. But I'd accepted my place as a student. I'd accepted that she was in charge, and I got my head down and did what she had to do. I went away and moaned about it at home, but I didn't say anything at the time. And by the end of that 12-week period, I realized that what she'd done is given me more than everybody else in the room. And after 3 years there, she was leaving, and I walked down the road with her and said, "You know something, Jude, you're the most intelligent person I've ever met in my entire life, and I want to thank you." And I explained to her how I'd felt at the time. And we had this amazing conversation as friends. And she inspired me. I watched a movie 2 nights ago called The Debaters. Have you seen it?
I have not. I'll have to take a look.
Watch it. It's an American movie. It's about racism in the 1930s and a black college and students that become the national debating championships in that very difficult period in American history and actually defeat Harvard in a debating contest. It's a very moving and wonderful film. But one of the things I learned from it about conflict and about arguing with people and having a conflict with somebody, anger management wise, is that you're not arguing with the person, you're arguing with their argument. And I got that from that film. And it really resonated with me because the next morning I had a very important meeting with people I was complaining about in an official domain. And I went in there thinking, don't argue with the person, argue with their argument. I picked that up from that film. So there's always so much to learn. Academia is something that, is still calling me back if I've got the time left in my life. And yet there's still so many other things I want to do and many other things I want to learn as well. But The Debaters, American movie, highly recommend it.
Yeah, I've heard of the movie. I'll have to take a look at it. And there's so many great movies out there. For you, was she aware of your background? Was it something that she was knowledgeable of?
I kept it secret when I first went to university. And then after a year, it gradually started to creep out because, I was in the public domain.
Yeah.
And then I got pigeonholed as the archetypal right-wing skinhead sociopath who, can kill people with his bare hands and glares across the table. But by that time, most of the students had got to know me as for who I was rather than that. So, but I managed to. It took me 2 years for the staff to figure out that I didn't belong in that pigeonhole, and very few of us actually do. Very few of us actually do. Those pigeonholes come from the movies. They don't come from real life. Some of the most wonderful deep feeling people who carry a great example for people of the future, the soldiers who have experienced war. They just need the weapons of words.
I totally agree with you. Talk about shame and guilt. Any shame or guilt for you? Things you could have did better, things you didn't do, things you did do. Where does that sit with you?
I don't think you can be ashamed of something you didn't do, unless you didn't help when you should have done.
Right,
I've never done
right.
that. I've always helped when I should have done. I could have been a better husband.
Yeah.
I always remind my wife that there's things I could have done better looking back, but we've been together for 47 years. We had some bad experiences when I came back from Mozambique, and she recognized that I had PTSD. It took me a while to resolve those issues, which I did. I realized you couldn't change the world. The world is shit sometimes, but I did have the power to change myself. And the only person any of us ever have the power to change is ourselves. We don't have the power to change other people. We can set an example and maybe they'll follow it, but the only person you can change is yourself. So I changed myself.
So what was that? What did that look like? You had a sense that you had some type of trauma, or did a counselor, your wife recognize and say, "Hey, listen, you need to get checked." So your wife was astute. She could sense that and said, "You need to get it checked in." I came back
and they had. It was just after Christmas. I'd been out there a year, and it was just after Christmas, and I'd seen some pretty awful things just recently, and she hung a welcome home daddy sign up outside the door, took me in, welcome home. The kids came up, lots of hugs and kisses, went in, showed me the video of the kids at Christmas getting their presents and the food on the table. And I'd come from a place where children were starving to death. People were murdered for a handful of bananas. So that transition was very, very difficult. And it came out as disinterest and anger. She recognized it straight away. It took me a lot longer until it came to a crisis. And then I got counseling. And I must have been the counselor's dream, because he would say, "Hi, Robin, time starts now pretty much. You've got 45 minutes. And I was like a runaway gun. I would just talk nonstop for 45 minutes. And then time's up, Robin. And after about 12 weeks, once a week, I came to the realization that, as I said, life is difficult. Life is very, very hard. Sometimes bad things happen. You can only change yourself. And I did change myself, and I rebuilt and started again and put things back together very successfully with the help of my wife more than anybody else. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. I've got one last question, more or less, for you. And this one is, I had talked to Jeff Struck with Black Hawk Down, and he's a chaplain now. He goes around the world talking to people. But, he was in the Humvee when the first guy got killed, the first Ranger got killed. And I think it was Private Padilla, if I recall, the Ranger. And I said, there are a lot of themes in books, man versus nature, man versus himself, themes of love, brotherhood, whatever. What takeaway did you get from your entire life? Was it love, how to love people better? Was it knowledge to dispense information to people in such a way that connects with them? What is the takeaway, the major message that you want to give to the world?
Oh, all of the above.
Yeah. Well, expound on that, please, if you can.
When I met my wife, I was on SAS selection.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the lone wolf. I'd been a paratrooper from the age of 15. I was coming up to 21. I had very few friends. I was extraordinarily angry. I hated people. I hated the world. I would have killed any of my country's enemies for any reason. Just point me at them. I believed that the army was my family. The army was my mother, and I belonged there. And I met this young woman, and she got into the cage with the wolf and tickled its ears. And she saw right through me. And it took her a while. She told me after a few weeks that she loved me. She said, I know you love the army, but if we were ever to get married, and I know we never will, and she gradually wore me down. And after two and a half years, I asked her to marry me. She said, no, I won't marry you. I said, why not? She said, it's 2.5 years and you still haven't told me you love me.
Uh-huh.
And then she got pregnant, and she miscarried. And then she got pregnant again. And then I told her I loved her, and she agreed to marry me. That woman gave me back my humanity. She dug deeper beneath the surface and found the real human being that was always there, but was too frightened to expose himself to the cruelties of the world. And she stayed with me through thick and thin, through all those years, and she still brings me firmly back down to earth if I ever get too full of myself. And she holds me up. She's a pillar. And between the two of those, between me and her, we're joined together by this marriage. We have 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and we've just had 2 weeks ago a 7th great grandchild, Elijah. And he is staying with us for another week before he goes back with his mum to his grandmother. They've got 4 generations in the house at the moment. And those are the wonderful things. And whatever goes on in somebody's life, you know, going back to family, going back to your humanity, going back to your belief in being a we person, not a me person, and belonging to something special. I wrote once that I got a picture of Alex, Charlotte, and Oliver sitting on top of one another, my 3 youngest children. And I said I didn't have any friends in the world, so I made 3. And it's those 3 kids. And you know, I would come back from abroad, take them up the mountains, go swimming with them, go climbing with them, camping with them, and do all those wonderful things with children in the time that I had available. Mick Lee, the man who inspired me, when I worked for him in London on the Al-Fayed team, he said, Alex had just been born. Alex was about 2 years old. He said, you play ball with him? He said, you buy him a football? I said, yeah, of course I bought him a football. He said, do you play ball with him? I went, yeah, of course I do. He said, that's good. He says, no good buying a kid something unless you play it with him. You know, you've got to play the game with him. Nobody remembers the gifts they were bought as a kid. They remember the time you spent and the games you played with your children, you know. And children are our future. I know it sounds a bit corny, but they are. And if you go away from this world and people put on your grave, he or she was a good person, then you can't get a higher accolade than that.
Wonderful story. And definitely, you know, you think of a Yoda, right? He's a male character passing information to people, but for you, it was really about kindness, love, compassion, empathy, all those things. A woman's touch, a soft touch for a young boy who had maybe a shell, a protection mode to discern whether someone was friend or foe. And I think you did quite well. Robin, thank you for coming on. Is there any question I didn't ask? Anything you'd like to chat about? Anything you'd like to promote? I'll definitely have your links down below so people can know where to find you, etc. Anything I missed?
No, I think they can all find me at robinhorsfall.com. That's my personal webpage. And I hope people will take a look and read through it and, you know, have a look at the shop. Every little helps. And I need the help just as much as everybody else. So it's been a pleasure being here, pleasure talking to you, and I hope we do it again sometime in the long distant future.
That'd be wonderful. Don't go anywhere. We'll chit chat offline for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and tell people again where to find you. RobinHorsfall.com. He's written the books Fighting Scared, The Words of the Wise Old Paratrooper. There are a few of those there. I think there's 3 books there. And then there's A Warrior Poet, A Soldier's Song. So check those out. And it's also an audio book. Okay. So look at those. I'll put the links down on YouTube. What a fantastic podcast with a gentleman who's done so much and yet has come away not a hard man, but someone who has heart, and that is something that we can all learn from. So thanks, Rob, for coming on, and we will talk to you later. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We fight monsters.